Welcome to The Leader's Abstract, the podcast about the inner work of leadership. Here we explore the ideas, habits, and blind spots that shape how mission-driven leaders show up for their teams and the communities they serve. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Rudder. With me today is Ami Schnauber, a healthcare executive with nearly 20 years' experience in aging services. Ami began her career in advocacy, policy, and regulatory work, serving as a lead advocate with Leading Age New York, and has since transitioned into business development roles, supporting organizations that serve older adults and the providers who care for them. Ami has spearheaded key initiatives, including advancing DEI in the C-suite and developing a statewide leadership academy. Ami is also an alumni of the Leading Age National Leadership Academy, and she is particularly passionate about supporting women and emerging leaders as they step into senior roles into long-term care. Ami, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's great to be here. I love talking about leadership, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
And you're an alumni of the Leadership Academy nationally, and you and I actually met at the Leadership Academy at the statewide level. So we have a great connection there. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that some. But first, let's hear about your leadership journey.
Great. Happy to talk about that. I have had a passion for aging services since I was a child. My grandmother, who I lived with for some time and was really important part of my life, she was an amazing singer, and we would spend time going and visiting residents in nursing homes and praying with them and singing with them. And since then, I think I've just had a bug for this part of the industry. And I just love working with elders. I feel like they bring so much to life. They have so much experience to share with us. I started out thinking that I might be a social worker. But when I was in college, I was doing some work on domestic violence and doing some research and realized that we really had to make policy changes. Like working one-on-one isn't where I wanted to put my energy. Important work, but that I felt like maybe I could make changes in policy. I ended up doing some internships at 2 nursing homes in the Ithaca area where I just really loved it. Went on to SUNY Albany, where I got my master's in public administration as opposed to getting my social work degree. And I think is a testament to the person I am. I was looking for a job. I put on a suit and I made 50 copies of my resume and just started walking the halls of the legislative office building. And sure enough, I got a job. And that's where I started. And I worked on a lot of issues, labor issues, healthcare issues, and really evolved into the healthcare field. And that's what led me to be at NYASA at the time, if people remember, and Leading Age New York. And it just seemed like a perfect marriage of the skill set that I brought, as well as the passion that I had for this field of work. And I think, one of the things I found throughout my leadership role is every person I've ever worked for has been a man. I've often worked in, whether when I was lobbying and was one of a handful of women at the time who were lobbyists, or even just as I was initially moving into healthcare and long-term care, oftentimes the only woman in the meetings. So when we talk about my interest in helping emerging leaders and women, I think it's because I've had my own personal experiences there. I've understood the challenges that come with it. I've mentored people as a result already. And so I really just wanted to take it to the next level. I was really active during COVID, where I was and you will probably remember this, I was sort of the lead person between government and health providers. And really hard work, but also incredible work. I think that the nonprofit sector stepped up in a really big way. I was pleased to be part of that. And so that's where I am now, is still wanting to work with this community of providers so we can have the best outcomes. And there's so many challenges today that they need to deal with. And any small part I can play in helping, I'm interested to do.
That's fascinating. And you mentioned, sometimes being the only woman around the table. Now, I've had somewhat the opposite experience. I started in my career, I started in a very male-dominated career. I was a mechanic, and in an abrupt time, over about 6 months, I made a very quick decision to go work in the work department in a hospital. And I was one of two men in the entire department. And it was a two hospital organization. And so they had one man at one hospital and then one at the other. So we were I would say, the token men in the departments. And so just having that experience, I can relate to that, albeit from a different perspective. But it is very interesting, when you are the only person like you around a table or in a department, and you see that sometimes there's this power dynamic, or sometimes there's just not space created for your viewpoint. So what does it actually look like to create space for those leaders, and especially women, and emerging leaders?
I think part of it, I think a lot of times, particularly with women or anyone who's an emerging leader, you've often come from an operations mindset and you're moving into a leadership role where you really do have to evolve the role that you play in your job. Oftentimes, you can't be doing the hands-on work that you're doing anymore, and you need to take on a different leadership focus. I think people can often struggle with delegating tasks to other people, trusting them, helping to support them so that you can trust them. And, I think we've all seen examples of people who were fantastic at their job. They're elevated to the next level up and they can't be successful. Because just because you're good at your job doesn't mean that you're going to be a natural leader in a new role. And there's a lot of debate about, are leaders built or are they born? I think that's probably somewhere. Certainly there's leaders that are built to lead, but I've seen lots of people who we can train them, we can help them through. And I think that's really been my goal.
Yeah. So what's interesting, and what you're referencing there, I think is called the Peter principle, where we tend to promote people who are good at something until they're not good at it. And very interesting across the board, both sides of the table, that tends to happen. And from the healthcare point of view, we've often heard this phrase where we have a nurse manager. And then we fire the nurse manager because we say, you're a great nurse, but you're a terrible manager. But we never gave that nurse the tools to be a manager. And I often equate that to, what if we did that on the clinical side? We tend to love to do it on the management side, where we just say, you're good at this clinical skill. You must obviously be good at this other skill that is completely unrelated to clinical work and being a manager. But we wouldn't take someone who is, let's say we have a CNA who is really great with people with dementia, and they have this wonderful skill of being a bedside aide, and being someone who is empathetic and is able to communicate well. We wouldn't naturally take that CNA and say, you're a great CNA, you're great at this. Why don't you start doing IVs? Or why don't you start passing meds? Or why don't you do wound care? And then not train them how to do that. But we often do that with leaders, don't we?
Absolutely. And I think that even when we do it, we do it in the form of sending them to a conference to do some sessions, or we have staff retreats where we pull people together. But I think a lot of the growth comes in the day-to-day, one-on-one, face-to-face, in real time, when you're challenged, when that week you've had issues and you have to manage them. And if you think about these nurses who have spent their time managing the individuals, the residents, the custom, right? And then all of a sudden that's not your role anymore. Your role is now managing a team of caregivers. And that's a completely different role. And we need someone in that role who has the clinical expertise, but they're also going to need to have the emotional intelligence and then some basics of how you manage people. And if we haven't given them that opportunity, we can't be surprised when they don't succeed. Often their goals in the new job are different, and I'm not sure we even spend a lot of time on what those goals are.
Yeah, it's amazing that, and we keep doing it over and over in healthcare. And I have a funny story from when I was a nursing home administrator. Um, and I'm sitting at my desk, and I had my door off to the right, and I see someone standing in my doorway, which is a nurse manager standing in my doorway. Um, and I look over and I say, "How's it going?" And she's has some issue with the nurse manager on the next unit over. Um, and so I listened to her issue, and trying to be a fair and equitable leader, and someone who listens to people without telling them what to do. I said, well, how would you feel about, just approaching this other nurse manager and discussing this issue, trying to use some of those principles of leadership, which is, you avoid triangulation. Like, we're not going to bring the
Right.
three of us in a room. And so let's you guys discuss this. Um, and then we can get together and see how we feel about it. So she does. And I say, I trust you to, I have full confidence in you to go and do this task. Um, a few minutes pass, and she shows back up at my door with a completely red face. And the conversation went so poorly that the other nurse actually had one of those personal alarms and pulled the personal alarm, um,
Oh.
and like ran out of the room feeling threatened. And so I'd asked this, how'd it go? And it didn't quite go exactly how she thought it would go. And I look at that as a failure on my part. I probably should have, given her more tools than "I trust you," and go, talk about your feelings to this person. Um, but that lack of toolkit that she had, and she was an excellent nurse, and she is now a nurse practitioner, and I'm sure an excellent nurse practitioner as well. But failing to give people that toolkit of how do we communicate, especially when it's a disagreement,
Right.
um, and it feels personal. Um, so where do you see in terms of some of these issues with leadership and kind of that leadership transition where we're going from um, a clinical or let's say a hands-on position if it's not in a clinical area. I'm sure that in various businesses we see this as well, where you're going from the hands-on work to now the hands-off and leadership and guidance work.
I think we start from the beginning. I know that training, people think training is simple and that it's just about educating them about the product or the service or the role. And they don't always understand the component parts of them. And the best trainers are able to break those things down. The other thing I would say about in terms of leaders and training is really understanding more about your employees. Because what I know for sure is employees know us far better than we know them, right? That this
That's
is
right.
always the case. And we need to understand that. And so, to the extent that we can, when someone's approaching us, meet them where they are and understand that they see this in a framework that's not the same framework we have. And a lot of times we end up doing that first, not recognizing it. So just recognizing it alone, I think, makes a difference. But then, secondly, being able to meet them where they are so that you can say, okay, what's really behind this? Because oftentimes what's being brought to you is the top of the iceberg, right? We have that concept of the
That's right.
iceberg, and there's bigger issues below. And if we can take a couple minutes to just dissect that so that then we can say, okay, let's role play. How might we have this conversation? And I think part two is recognizing that not all of your staff are the same. So as a leader, what I've found is there's people who they are self-starters, they're great, I can trust them, I can delegate. They will let me know if there's a roadblock I need to remove, and I just let them fly. that gives me the time necessary for the other team members who maybe need more hand holding, who maybe need a little bit of more education and training. So I think part of it is recognizing that and then always assuming, I feel like we can never give enough mentoring and education so that when we're elevating someone, start at the place of they may need very fundamental training, but let's get curious about who they are, what's driving them, and see from them what their challenges are. And if we've spent a little time doing that, we may be better equipped to help them with, we're not going to send them into a situation that because now we know that they're not going to be prepared for that.
Absolutely. And I will say, part of that there are some basic tools that I've used when we're looking to guide someone, but yet as a manager, we certainly don't want to, come across as I'm telling you exactly how to do or I'm mansplaining to you something that you probably already know. It's more of I'm saying some general knowledge that you may or may not have. And I always often find that the phrase, you may know this better than I do, but, and I lead into that. And I feel like that opens up a door for someone for all abilities around the table. So if we give that acknowledgement that, you may know this better than I do, or you may know this, something along those lines, so that, or, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Some of those just basic management principles, sometimes we look past, because the difference between doing that and just having your boss saying, I want you to do this, and I want you to do it in this fashion. So those are some of those basic management tools that are not taught, unfortunately.
Right.
And I think in long-term care and healthcare in particular, we don't do that. There has been recently, as you know, a long or a large push for leadership academies and leadership training, and now we're seeing communities starting to do that, where they actually are community-wide leadership academies that are not industry specific, which I think is outstanding.
Mhm.
And so, are you seeing that on the ground right now with long-term care, this kind of transition, this finally a realistic or realization of we have to start training people how to manage and lead?
Well, I don't know that I think it's absolutely true. And I think so much is happening so quickly, right? Things have changed a lot. I think in the 20 years ago, the average length of stay in a nursing home was 7 years. Now it's about 18 months, and maybe it's changed. That was probably a couple years old. And acuity has changed substantially, right? So much is changing organization wide. And at the same time, I don't know that providers are changing quickly enough in response to it, right? Oftentimes we're still running things the same way. So I think that's a challenge. So we've got people coming up and emerging who are facing significant challenges. Lots of people retiring, and I've seen systems where people try to retire and they can't because they
Yeah.
can't find somebody to take the place. And so I do think that we need to start thinking about those transitions, and we have to start preparing people. Uh, and and I think that that's where a big challenge is. I think that as leaders, one of the things I like to say is that we don't need to teach until we've been asked to teach to some extent. Like sometimes our team comes to us and we immediately know the answer and we want to give them to them as opposed to letting them learn along the way, and that's part of it. And I think one of the things I've always tried to say is how much time do I have? Is if they bring me something, if this is an urgent matter, I know how to deal with it immediately,
Yeah.
and I will. But that's not going to benefit them if they constantly come to me and I instantly take care of it. So one of the ways is to say, how can I free up time and say, sometimes they're going to come to me and I have some time. And so I'm going to give them some things to think about. I'm going to ask them questions. and I'm going to send them back to take another stab at the problem. Or maybe
Absolutely.
it's somewhere in the middle where I tell them precisely what needs to be done, but then they're still going to do it. And then
Yeah.
there's the high priority, I'm taking care of it right now. So that's part of the how you learn to delegate. But I always think of this one example. When I'm on vacation, I've sort of made this commitment. I'm not going to be on my phone all day, but I'll check emails in the morning and I'll check emails at night. And I remember an email. So that night, 11 o'clock at night, I'm looking at emails, and one came in at about 9 o'clock, and there was a problem. And when I read that email, I immediately knew what we need to do about it. And then there's a whole series of back and forth emails until about 9 o'clock. I'm sorry, until 3 o'clock. They finally come to the solution, which was the exact right solution.
Right.
And it occurred to me at that moment, that's leadership training. That's
Absolutely.
giving people the opportunity. And I think a lot of times we jump in too quickly. And we even do that with our friends, right? Sometimes they just want to vent. And so I try to learn, I'm not going to give you advice until you tell me you need advice.
Yeah.
I'm instead going to get curious. And I think that's another really key piece. Instead of answering every question, you become the listener. You ask the probing questions. A lot of times people will be able to get there on their own. And when they do, that's going to stick with them a lot better than if you've just essentially told them how to do something.
Absolutely. And my mentor, when I was a young nursing home administrator, I often say I knew he knew had the answer. He wouldn't give it to me. He would let me work it out. And quite often he would do that. He would ask those kind of probing questions. He's famous for saying, have you considered, and not like considered this as a solution, as have you considered thinking about how this would impact, X department, or how this would
Mhm.
impact, or how would that make that person feel? And you get there. One of the tools I use in that type of, and my staff can probably all attest to this. And if they're listening, I apologize, because you all know this is purposeful. Quite often when there's a problem, if it comes across as a text message or an email, I don't respond right away. Especially if I know you got this
Mhm.
and I'm going to let you work this out. And a great example, when I was a nursing home administrator and I was training a young social worker to be the next nursing home administrator, she was very quick to call me and look for solutions, look for the answer. This is happening. What do I do? And so I got to the point where I wouldn't answer my phone. I'd let her leave a voicemail, and then I'd call her back in about an hour. And 9 times out of 10, she'd say, "Oh, I figured it out. Don't you worry." And it's like, I knew you would. That's why I didn't
Right.
pick up the phone. Um, and so, that is, and it's hard. It's hard for us as leaders because we do this work because we're passionate about it and we love it.
Mhm.
And would I love to sit behind the nursing home administrator desk right now and you put out those fires? And yes, absolutely. But I pull myself back because, that's micromanaging. It doesn't feel good to
Mhm.
that person. Um,
Right. And you
and
need to be able to take time off too, right? I mean, I think that's part of it. When you become a leader, there's so many challenges as leaders that we need to start addressing, and you're not going to be able to do it if you're keeping at the operational level. You need
Absolutely.
to find space to think, and that's one of the things that I like to help leaders with is let's dedicate some time so we can think through this because the thing about leadership is you don't have all of the answers. But in most cases, you can come up with some really good solutions when you have someone to run these ideas by, where you can think, where you can workboard things together, workshop things together. I find that there could be these aha moments so many times, even when you're dealing with a challenging situation with someone else, we forget that what we see isn't always the entire reality. And people don't realize that. So people will bring them something and if you think you're smarter, if you think you know better, if you can check yourself a little bit and say, what don't I know here? So instead of debating what this person has brought to you, get curious. Why is it that you see that way? One of my favorite activities that I've done is you have two people look at the same exact image for a couple minutes. You put the image away, they each write down what they saw in the image. The lists are never the same.
Never. Yeah.
Never. And I remember mine was like a farm scene. And so I talked about a barn and chickens. And then my partner talked about a car and a bridge. And I said, there wasn't a bridge in that. Like in my mind, I
Yeah.
looked at the picture, there was no bridge there. And until I saw that picture again, did I realize that it literally was there and I didn't see it.
Yeah. Sometimes things are right in front of us and we don't see them. It's incredible, and one last thing before we wrap up here, there's often that viewpoint game that we play where we have either a globe or a box, and we realize that, on our side, let's say on our side of the box, we can see the top and the sides, and the person holding the other end of the box can see their side, but we can't.
Right.
But we can both see the top. We can both sort of see the sides. And I think that's where we come to finding our middle ground with people and understanding that there's something on their side of the box that we don't see, that we don't need to see. And it's for them.
Like, instead of saying it is something, you say what I see is. And instead of thinking it's A or B, maybe it's A and B. And we can debate all day and have a winner, but it doesn't mean that we've accurately described what the situation is.
That's right.
So
it's all about our viewpoint.
Our knowing and recognize other people have a different viewpoint, that we should be open to hearing, because in challenging times like now, until you have the full picture of things, you're never really going to quite get it right.
That's right. If there were easy answers, then we wouldn't have jobs. Right. Amy, thank you for coming. Is there anything you'd like to plug, or how can we get in touch with you about leadership development and mentorship?
So I think the best way to get in touch with me is probably on LinkedIn. You can look me up, Ami Schnauber, but you also, my personal email is pretty easy, amy.schnauber@gmail.com. And I'm really just trying to create space, work with leaders or emerging leaders, one-on-one or even in a group setting, to really help them navigate some of these difficult challenges, get some clarity, and help them move forward strategically.
Amazing. Thanks for all that you do. And thank you for listening to The Leaders Abstract. These episodes are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I will tag Amy in the post for this episode. I've been your host, Dr. Jeremy Rudder. This has been our guest, Amy, and this has been The Leaders Abstract. Thank you.
Thank you.